All right, welcome back everybody to the deep dive. We're diving into something really crucial today, something that's been getting a lot of attention from the U.S. Department of Education, and for good reason. We're talking about school climate.
School climate.
Yeah, those positive and respectful and safe places where, students can really thrive.
Right.
And I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, okay, school climate, we get it, it's important, but how do I wrap my head around this without getting completely overwhelmed?
Yeah.
Well, that is where we come in. We've been digging into the research, and today we are focusing on a key paper, Systems View of School Climate, a theoretical framework for research.
Okay.
It's by Rudisil and colleagues, and it's going to be our guide as we unpack this, sometimes really complicated but oh so important world of school climate. Think of this deep dive as a roadmap, a shortcut to understanding the atmosphere of a school, what makes it tick.
I like that.
So what's our mission today? What are we trying to achieve? Well, we really want to get to the bottom of what school climate actually means, to explore all the different things that can shape it, and most importantly, to give you a clear and organized way to think about this topic.
A framework.
A framework, exactly. Something you can actually use.
Yeah, and I think one of the most fascinating things you discover right off the bat when you start looking into school climate research is that despite all the work that's been done, there's no single agreed-upon definition of what school climate actually is.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox. You have this huge, very developed field of research. There's so much information out there, but there's this lack of conceptual consensus. So it can be tough to know what truly matters, what to focus on.
So it's like everyone's talking about the same thing, but they're not really on the same page about what that thing actually is.
Exactly. And you see situations where researchers will describe school climate as this really complex phenomenon, but then they'll go and measure it with very simplistic tools. So it's like trying to describe a whole orchestra with all its different instruments and sections, but you're only listening to the drums. You're missing a lot of the picture.
You're not getting the full symphony.
Exactly.
So it's not just the way it's measured, but also just the definition itself that's inconsistent.
Right. And the paper points out that this lack of agreement isn't just an academic debate. It has real implications for research and for practice. Because when researchers are working from different definitions of school climate, it makes it really hard to compare their findings and to figure out what actually works when it comes to improving schools.
Yeah, because if you're not even sure what you're measuring, how can you possibly compare results or draw any meaningful conclusion?
Right, exactly.
And to make things even more confusing, there are all these related ideas that often get mixed up with school climate.
Oh, absolutely.
Things like school belonging, how much students feel like they belong in the school, the overall school culture, the climate of individual classrooms, the support that teachers provide.
All these different pieces of the puzzle.
It's like trying to understand a city by looking at a bunch of individual buildings without a map of how they all connect.
Right, you need that bigger picture view.
Yeah.
And to connect this back to the bigger picture of research and practice, this lack of conceptual clarity has real-world consequences. Because researchers are operating with all these different ideas of what school climate is, sometimes their findings seem contradictory.
Oh, I see.
And it makes it challenging to build a solid understanding of what actually matters.
Okay, so it sounds like we need a better way to think about school climate, a framework that can bring some order to this, as you said, chaotic landscape.
Absolutely. And that's where the systems view of school climate, or SVSC, comes in.
Okay, SVSE.
SVSC,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a framework that was specifically developed to guide future research and to provide this broadly applicable structure for thinking about school climate.
Okay, so the SVSC, this is our lifeline in this confusing sea of school climate research.
That's a great way to put it. And the cool thing about the SVSC is that it builds upon a well-established theory, which is called ecological systems theory, or EST.
EST.
EST, yeah. And EST was developed by Uri Bronfenbrenner, and it's basically a way to understand how individuals grow and develop within these layers of interconnected environments.
Okay.
So you have your immediate surroundings, like your family and your school, but then you also have these wider influences, like your community and the larger cultural norms.
Right.
And the SVSC takes this layered perspective of EST and adapts it specifically for school climate research.
Okay, so instead of just seeing a school as one big blob, the SVSC helps us zoom in and out and see the different levels at play.
Precisely. It helps us consider these different levels when we're doing research, when we're trying to understand what's going on. It draws a much clearer line between school climate itself and all these related concepts we talked about, like school culture or a sense of belonging. And it highlights the importance of not just looking at school climate in isolation, but looking at all the different contextual and structural factors that can shape it.
Right.
So things like the neighborhood the school is in, the policies of the school district, even broader societal trends.
Okay.
And it helps us distinguish between what we call proximal systems, those are the more immediate day-to-day influences on school climate, and distal systems, which are the broader, more distant factors.
Okay, so we're not just looking at what's happening within the school walls, but also the forces outside the school that can affect the climate inside.
Exactly. It's this multi-layered approach. And ultimately, the goal of the SVSE is to better reflect the patterns of perceptions that form school climate.
Okay, so it's not just about what's objectively happening, but how people in the school experience those things.
Precisely. Because ultimately, school climate is about how the people in that school, students, teachers, administrators, staff, how they perceive their environment, how they feel about it. And the SVSE is trying to give us a way to capture that more accurately. And I think it's worth mentioning that the original paper by Rudisill and colleagues actually has a really helpful visual, figure 1, that illustrates these nested systems really well.
Okay, so a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Right. Exactly. All right, so now that we have a general sense of what the SVSE is trying to do, let's dig into some of the specifics. What are the key components of this framework? What are the different parts that make up the SVSE?
Yeah, let's break it down.
One of the really interesting things that the SVSE introduces is this idea of nanosystems.
Nanosystems. Okay, now this sounds really technical. What are nanosystems?
It is kind of technical, but it's a very powerful concept. So nanosystems are essentially these smaller, more immediate groups that you find nested within the larger school environment. So think of things like your specific classes, your friend groups, your sports teams, even different academic tracks within a school.
Okay, so those smaller social circles that students are part of.
Exactly. And the idea here is that a student's experience within these smaller groups can actually significantly influence how they feel about the school as a whole.
Ah.
So it allows us to examine the interactions between these smaller parts within a single school. So instead of just thinking about the school as one big social scene, the SVSE encourages us to look at these smaller worlds within it.
Okay, so for example, my experience on the debate team might give me a very different perspective on the school climate than someone who spends all their time in the music room.
Exactly. Two very different nanosystems, two potentially very different experiences of the same school.
And then there's the mesosystem, which we touched on a bit earlier.
Right, the mesosystem.
How does that fit into the SVSC?
So in the traditional EST, the mesosystem is all about how those main immediate environments, like home and school, how they interact with each other. And the SVSC expands on this idea. So it includes not just interactions between these big contexts, but also interactions between those smaller nanosystems and between nanosystems and the larger microsystems.
So we're getting even more nuanced.
We are. This gives us a much richer picture of how school climate actually works in practice.
Okay, so we've talked about these closer-in influences, those smaller groups and how they interact. What about the broader, more distant influences on school climate?
Right, those are important too. And the SVSC actually incorporates the exosystem, the macrosystem, and the chronosystem from EST.
Okay, remind me, what are those again? It's been a while since my intro to psych class.
Sure. So the exosystem includes things that don't directly involve the student but still have an impact on them. So things like a parent's workplace and their policies, the local community organizations.
Okay.
The macrosystem is even broader. It encompasses those big cultural beliefs, government policies, societal norms that can filter down and influence the school.
Right, like the values of the society as a whole.
Exactly. And then the chronosystem, that's all about the element of time. So things like a student's own development over the years, significant life events they might be experiencing, even broader historical occurrences. All these things can shape how a school climate is perceived.
So, for instance, a major event in the community or even something like a national tragedy could affect the school climate.
Absolutely. And on a more individual level, a student who's going through a difficult time at home might perceive the school climate very differently than a student who's feeling very supported.
Right, it's all about context.
It is. And another important concept that SVSC brings in is this idea of an ecological niche.
An ecological niche. Okay, this sounds very nature-y.
It does. So in EST, an ecological niche is basically the context that best fits the unique needs of an individual. And in the context of school climate, this means recognizing that some school environments might be a better fit for certain students' needs and personalities,
Okay.
which helps explain why different students might experience the same school climate in very different ways.
So it's like finding the right instrument in an orchestra. A clarinet player might thrive in a concert band, but maybe not so much in a heavy metal band.
A great analogy. So the SVSC is really emphasizing that there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to school climate. What works for one student might not work for another.
Right. And speaking of fitting things together, one of the things that really struck me in the paper was this idea that researchers aren't always clear on whether they're offering a definition of school climate, a way to categorize it, or a model that explains cause and effect.
Right, and that's a crucial distinction.
So why is that distinction so important?
Because that lack of clarity is really at the root of a lot of the confusion we've been talking about. A definition tells you the essential nature of something, what it is and what it isn't.
Okay.
A taxonomy helps you organize the different elements or variables within that thing.
Right, like a filing system.
Exactly. And then a causal model tries to explain why things happen the way they do, what the relationships are between different factors. And when these get blurred, it's hard to know what's being studied and how all the pieces fit together.
Right, so you need to be clear on whether you're describing what something is, how it's organized, or how it works.
Precisely. And the paper even includes a table, Table 1, that lists some common themes in past research on school climate. So things like physical resources and the school environment, teaching and instruction, safety and discipline, leadership styles, relationships between people, and shared beliefs and values.
Right.
But the problem is these themes are often treated in very different ways across different studies.
So we're back to this chaotic conceptual landscape that the paper talks about, where school climate becomes this kind of catch-all phrase.
Exactly. It's this umbrella term that covers a whole bunch of things, and different researchers throw all sorts of different components under it.
And then you have the question of whose perspective is being measured. Are we only looking at how teachers feel? Or are we considering the shared feelings across different groups, like teachers, students, administrators?
Right. And the paper points out that there's often this unspoken assumption that if something seems to influence student outcomes, like their academic achievement or rates of misbehavior, then it automatically gets included in the definition of school climate.
So it becomes this kind of grab bag of characteristics. And no wonder it's so hard to get a handle on what school climate actually is and how to improve it,
Exactly.
because everyone's working with a slightly different understanding of the concept.
Precisely. And as we've been saying, that lack of a shared understanding makes it really hard to know what we should be measuring, how we should be measuring it, and ultimately how we can effectively make things better in schools.
Right. It's like trying to hit a target when you're not even sure where the target is.
A great analogy.
Yeah.
So the SVSC aims to address this problem by being very precise about what school climate is and how it connects to those other factors we've been talking about. Let's take a closer look at some of these common themes in school climate research through the lens of the SVSC.
Okay.
The paper points to shared beliefs and values as being really central. What do you think about when you hear that phrase?
Well, when I think about shared beliefs and values, I think about things like how dedicated the school staff are, how much they really care about the students and their work,
Right.
how involved the students are in their learning. Are they passive or are they active participants?
Yeah.
The level of trust and respect between everyone in the school community, having high expectations for both students and staff, and this belief that all students, regardless of their background, have the ability to succeed.
That's really important.
And the paper mentions some important models, like the ones developed by Hoy and Hannum and Haynes and colleagues, and how they emphasize concepts like academic emphasis,
Right.
which is essentially how much value the school places on academic achievement.
Right. And what's fascinating here is how these shared beliefs, they're not just abstract ideas, they actually play out in real life in very concrete ways.
How so?
Well, the paper gives an example of how different expectations based on a student's race can actually reflect those underlying shared beliefs within a school.
Yeah, like if teachers have lower expectations for students of color.
Exactly. And that can really impact students' perceptions of the school climate and their own sense of belonging.
Absolutely. And the paper also connects this to Spencer's idea of PVST, which is this framework for understanding how different ecological contexts, including the school environment, can support or hinder students' development.
Right. And Spencer's work suggests that those negative stereotypes in the school environment, they can actually impact how Black students, for instance, view themselves and their own potential.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
It can be.
And it's really interesting that the paper also highlights how when a school really strongly emphasizes academics, it actually predicts better academic results for students.
Yeah, there's evidence for that. Now, what about relationships and social interactions? That seems like another really big piece of the puzzle when it comes to school climate.
Absolutely. The paper really stresses the importance of connection and support, having a strong sense of community and belonging within the school.
Right.
And it points out that how people perceive their relationships within the school, that's a really fundamental aspect of school climate.
Yeah, it's almost universally included in the various models.
So we're talking about things like how well teachers connect with their students. Do students feel like their teachers care about them?
Right.
The quality of interactions between different groups in the school, staff, students, parents, administrators, how are those interactions positive, negative? Even just the informal ways that people interact, like in the hallways or at lunch,
Right.
and the overall level of collaboration and cooperation. Is it a competitive environment or is it more collaborative?
And then, of course, we have the issue of safety. How does the SVSC approach the concept of safety within the school climate?
Well, safety here goes beyond just physical security. It's also about feeling socially and emotionally safe. So it's not just about feeling safe from physical harm, but also feeling safe to express yourself, to take risks, to be yourself without fear of judgment or ridicule.
Right.
And the paper suggests that our sense of safety in school is deeply connected to those shared beliefs and values that we were just talking about, and to the kinds of relationships that exist within the school community.
Absolutely.
It's a really integral part of most models of school climate. And when we talk about safety, we're talking about things like the school's rules and how clear they are, the accepted ways of behaving, the general sense of order, and importantly, how fairly and consistently discipline is handled.
Right. And that sense of fairness is so important.
Absolutely. And the U.S. Department of Education really emphasizes school safety as a key element of a positive school climate.
Yeah, it's front and center in their work.
And research has also shown that a lack of safety is linked to problems like school violence and bullying.
Oh, absolutely.
And the paper actually points out that bullying can really harm a student's engagement in school and their academic performance.
Right.
And it highlights how a school's response to bullying can actually shape everyone's perception of the relationships and how safe they feel in the school.
So it's not just about preventing bullying, but also about how the school responds when it does occur.
Exactly. And the paper even talks about how the clarity and fairness of school rules can influence things like student misbehavior.
So if students feel like the rules are arbitrary or that they're not applied consistently, they're more likely to act out.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It does. Now, the SVSC also talks about some themes that, while they're definitely related to school climate, they're not actually considered part of the climate itself within this particular framework.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Teaching and instruction is one of those.
Interesting. So why is teaching and instruction not considered part of school climate in the SVSC?
Well, the argument is that while how teachers teach and what they teach, those are incredibly important and they're part of the school's immediate environment, its microsystem,
Right.
they're more like things that we can directly observe,
Okay.
rather than the shared perceptions and understandings that make up the climate itself.
So it's about the feeling, not the actual content of the teaching.
Exactly. Of course, what teachers believe and how they approach teaching can influence those shared values and the quality of relationships. And, teachers are constantly shaping the social and learning climate in their classrooms.
Right.
But the SVSC makes this distinction that these are things that contribute to the climate. They influence it.
But they're not the climate itself.
Right. And this is actually different from some other models. Some other models actually do include those elements as part of their definition of school climate.
Interesting. So different frameworks, different ways of slicing the pie.
Exactly. Leadership is another area that gets this related but not part of categorization in the SVSC.
Leadership.
Hmm.
So why wouldn't the principal's leadership style be considered part of school climate?
Well, it's similar to the reasoning behind teaching and instruction. While the principal and other leaders in the school, they have a huge impact on the school environment, and they can definitely influence the climate.
Right.
For instance, the research has shown that when there are strong, positive relationships between administrators and teachers, the perceptions of the school climate tend to be better.
That makes sense.
But the SVSC sees leadership more as a process or a characteristic of the school's organization rather than part of the shared perceptions themselves.
Okay.
So it's about things like how decisions are made, how resources are allocated, how the school interacts with the community. And again, those things can influence the climate, they can shape it, but they're not seen as the climate itself.
Okay. And lastly, what about the physical environment of the school, the building itself?
Yeah, the physical space. So the SVSC views the school building, how well it's maintained, is it clean? Is it welcoming? The resources that are available, all those tangible aspects as part of the school's immediate environment.
Okay.
Its microsystem. And of course, those things can reflect the values and beliefs of the school community. For example, a school that is clean and well cared for, that might be communicating a shared belief about the importance of the learning environment.
Right. It sends a message.
It does. But again, the SVSC says these are observable characteristics. They're not the shared feelings and understandings that actually define school climate.
Okay, so we've unpacked all these different aspects of the school environment. But after all that, how does the SPSC actually define school climate, in its own terms?
Right, getting to the heart of it. So the SVSC defines school climate as the affective and cognitive perceptions regarding social interactions, relationship safety, values, and beliefs held by students, teachers, administrators, and staff within a school. It emphasizes that these perceptions are dynamic. They can change over time, which is important to remember. And it really highlights the idea that the school is a common referent for everybody involved. And what's really important here, it's the aggregated perceptions, the overall sense across the entire school community that really constitutes the school climate.
So it's not just about what individuals think or feel, it's about the collective understanding of what the school is like.
Exactly. It's the shared experience. And the real insight here is that school climate isn't just about what's happening in the school. It's about how everybody feels about those things, those interactions, those relationships, those values. And that's a crucial shift in thinking.
Yeah, because what might seem like a positive environment to one person could feel very different to someone else.
Absolutely. And the SVSC also makes it very clear what isn't considered school climate.
Okay, so what's out of bounds?
According to the SVSC, things like the school's structural characteristics, so, its size, whether it's public or private, its location, urban or rural, and so on, and the overall characteristics of the people who attend or work there, so the racial makeup of the student body, the socioeconomic status of the community, the general achievement levels, those are not considered part of school climate.
Interesting. So those are all really important aspects of a school, but they're not the climate itself.
Right. The SVSC argues that while those things can certainly form a base for perceptions, they're conceptually different from the shared perceptions that make up the climate.
Okay, so we're being really specific here about what we're talking about when we talk about school climate.
We are.
And just to reiterate, what are the three core components of school climate according to the SVSC?
So those three key areas are first, social interactions and relationships.
Okay.
So that includes things like trust, cooperation, the level of support that people feel, a sense of fairness and equity, and the dynamics of the peer culture, including things like inclusion and exclusion and bullying.
Right, so all those interpersonal aspects of the school environment.
Exactly. The second core component is safety, and that encompasses both a feeling of physical safety and a sense of social and emotional security.
So feeling safe from harm, but also feeling safe to express yourself and be yourself.
Precisely. And the third component is shared beliefs and values.
Okay.
And that covers a whole range of things, how clear and fair the rules are perceived to be, how effectively and fairly discipline is administered, the overall feeling of safety, the expectations for student success, and what they call academic emphasis, that importance placed on academic pursuits.
Right, so the school's overall ethos, what they value and prioritize.
Exactly. And it's really important to keep in mind that the SVSC really distinguishes between these shared perceptions, which make up the school climate, and those more objective aspects of the school's context, its structure, and the processes that take place.
Right, because those things can influence the climate, but they're not the climate itself.
Exactly. Now that we have a solid understanding of what the SVSC is and what it focuses on, how does it actually stack up against some of those existing models of school climate that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, good question. What's the advantage of looking at school climate through this particular lens?
Well, one of the big advantages is that the SVSC really provides this much needed structure for examining causal models of school climate. It helps us understand those complex relationships and those mechanisms of influence that are at work.
Okay.
And the paper points out that a lot of previous models, they tended to blur the lines between those structural and contextual factors, like, the community the school's in and the actual climate itself.
So they kind of lumped everything together.
They did, and they didn't always explicitly consider the different levels of influence, from those immediate day-to-day interactions to those broader societal factors.
Okay.
And to really illustrate how the SVSC can help us understand those existing models, the researchers actually took a look at two very well-known models: Hoy and colleagues' organizational health model and Haynes and Comer's school development project model.
Okay.
And they analyzed those models using the SVSC as a guide.
Interesting. And what did they find? What were the key takeaways from that analysis?
Well, they found that both of those earlier models do incorporate a lot of the key themes we've been talking about. They address things like relationships, leadership, shared values. And the Haynes and Comer model also includes safety and the physical environment.
Okay.
But what the SVSC analysis revealed is that neither of those models really fully integrates those multiple levels of influence or takes into account all of the different systems in this comprehensive way that the SVSC does.
So they're missing some of the nuances.
They are. And, it's important to remember that Comer's model was initially designed for specific types of school settings. It wasn't really intended to be this universal model.
Okay.
And Hoy's model, that one primarily focuses on teachers' perceptions.
Right.
It doesn't really take into account the perspectives of students or other members of the school community.
So the SVSC offers a broader and more nuanced view.
It does. Let's delve a little deeper into Hoy's model, because when they analyzed it through the SVSC framework, some really interesting things stood out.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So the paper points out that Hoy's model talks about school climate existing at these different levels, technical, managerial, and institutional levels. But this approach sometimes ends up blending together the school's structure, its processes, and the actual climate itself in a way that the SVSC is trying to disentangle.
Okay.
So, for example, things like the resources a school has, the principal's influence, which Hoy includes as part of school climate. Well, the SVSC would argue that those things are better understood as part of the school's broader environment, its mesosystem, that influences the climate.
Okay.
So they're important, but they're not the climate itself.
Right. And I remember the SVSC is really big on looking at those broader external factors.
It is. And the paper notes that the SVSC considers a much wider range of those, things like educational reform movements, the backgrounds of the teachers, all those things that can filter down and affect the school climate.
Right. It's that bigger picture view again.
It is. And another key difference is that Hoy's model really focuses on how teachers perceive the school climate. And the SVSC really pushes for getting input from various people in the school community.
Right. So not just teachers, but students, administrators, staff, everyone.
Exactly, because their experiences and perspectives can sometimes be quite different.
Yeah.
The paper actually cites some research that shows that while teachers and students often perceive school climate in similar ways, there are definitely some key differences.
Yeah.
So getting a more holistic view is really important.
Makes sense. Now, what about Haynes and Comer's model? How does the SVSC help us understand their approach better?
Well, the Haynes and Comer model, it has this really strong emphasis on building positive interpersonal relationships
Okay.
and enticing student success, particularly in those contexts where there might be negative influences coming from the home or the neighborhood.
Right. So they're really focused on providing support and creating a positive environment to counteract those challenges.
Exactly. And that actually aligns really well with the SVSC's emphasis on the mesosystem and the importance of involving parents and the community in those efforts to improve the school climate.
Okay.
However, the SVSC would argue that some of the things that Haynes and Comer include as part of their interventions to improve school climate, things like the physical condition of the building or the principal's direct involvement in certain areas,
Right.
the SVSC would categorize those as more aspects of the school's context or its operational processes.
Okay. So again, important, but not part of the climate itself.
Exactly. And another important point is that the Haynes and Comer model was initially developed for urban schools in high poverty areas.
Right.
And the SVSC, with its broader framework, it offers a way to think about school climate that can be applied to different types of schools.
Right. It's more universally applicable.
It is. And I think it's really interesting that the paper actually points out that this lack of a consistent framework has led to some potentially confusing practices in school climate research.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, they point out that sometimes you'll see researchers who are citing both Hoy's and Haynes and Comer's models,
Mhm.
and even using questionnaires based on each of those models within the same study.
Wow, that's kind of mixing apples and oranges, isn't it?
It is. And that can lead to what are called construct validity issues.
Construct validity.
Construct validity, yeah. Essentially meaning that you might not actually be measuring what you think you're measuring because you're using these different tools that are based on different frameworks.
Oh, okay.
So it's like trying to measure length, but some studies are using